as in my own recovery and as with my family. I am my client. I I am the worst client that I get all of the time, and I'm willing to make those investments. And that's really led me to a lot of success. And I learned that at a super young age. Families can access the same private treatment facilities that anyone would be able to access voluntarily.
Welcome back to the Success in South Florida podcast. I'm your host, Adam Rossen, and on today's episode, I'm so excited to have Richard Casey here. Richard, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Thank you, Adam. I'm doing pretty good.
Good. So I'm not going to give you an introduction because I think there is no introduction for you. I mean, we're going to go through your whole, kind of, not your whole life, but obviously we want to know how you came here and all the great things that you're doing. I know you have an amazing law firm. You're doing a ton of things in the recovery community. And so let's just dive right in and let's hear your story, okay, and what makes you so successful and so special. So Richard, I know, talk to us a little bit about growing up in Rhode Island and what, some of your formative years where I know your dad was pretty successful. So really just start talking to us about some of those things.
Yeah, so my father and my grandfather had started a small business in Rhode Island around 1982. My grandfather previously operated an armored car business, and my father...
I bet he's got stories from that, huh?
Yeah, he has got some interesting stories. It was an interesting time. Rhode Island was the jewelry capital of the world at this time, and so there were a lot of precious metals coming in and out of Rhode Island's manufacturing facilities. And so obviously this was pre some of the changes towards globalization. And so there was a lot of industry in that area. And my dad growing up would work for my grandfather in the armored car business until the plane crash landed. So he no longer wanted to do that. They started a security company. So my dad kind of developed this on the side and ultimately became the prevailing company. It's still around today. My grandmother runs it. She's 88, and so it's been around for 40 years.
Nice. And is she active in the day-to-day?
Yeah, she runs it day-to-day.
Oh,
She answers the phone till 11 o'clock at night.
Okay. Does she provide the security?
No, she doesn't provide the security.
Okay. Not anymore. Okay.
No, not ever. But no, so growing up for me, that was kind of always the trajectory. Like my dad was an entrepreneur. My grandfather an entrepreneur. He had been state fire marshal and the president of the union for the firefighters in the city of Providence before that. But so a little bit of politics and a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit has kind of filled my formative years.
Does he know where Jimmy Hoffa is buried?
No, he definitely doesn't know where Jimmy Hoffa is buried, although his armored car business was a Teamsters enterprise, and it was their striking that ultimately led them to bankruptcy. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Now, maybe 2 months ago, we were at a Panthers game, and you were telling me, we were talking about my kids, my boys and everything, and you were telling me a great story about when you were little, you would go to work with your dad and meetings with your dad.
Yeah.
He would teach you. So I want to talk about that today because it was such a fascinating story and it's still in my mind. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I used to love it, but my dad was, I think we were really in a community of other small business owners. And the community in Rhode Island and the businesses in Rhode Island never really hit major corporations. And so employment really was that if you were to advance in the world there, it's such a small location, you're probably advancing through entrepreneurial activities. And so you're probably part of a small family business. So our country club and our friends and my dad's group were all these other really small business owners, or up to including like presidents of the hospital group or, the chancellor and president of the local university. So when I was younger, and I guess my dad's other friends as well, they all kind of took their sons to the same events. So we would on Saturdays go to lunch at a particular restaurant, and then we would meet his friends there, and it was like a fun networking event. And then if it was in the summers, we'd be playing golf, and I would caddy for him at tournaments, and his partner would have their son. And so, but
How old were you?
anywhere from 7 through 17.
Okay.
Right?
So even as young as 7, so 7, 10, 12 years
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, younger than that, I'm sure, there was a time where my dad brought me as an infant in a car seat, and I was left on the bar of the country club with the bartender to watch me while he played golf,
Very nice.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it was just the idea that I was going to grow up in that environment, and that he was going to tell me about business. He was going to introduce me to his colleagues. He was going to give me the inside scoop before the meeting. And the relationship was always the meeting, right? It wasn't about selling a particular product. It was never about getting someone to commit to the buy or commit to the sale, because it's not about that. It's not about making a transaction. It's about building a relationship and continuing that relationship forever. And ultimately, that person may end up purchasing some services. They may not. They may end up referring you business. They may not. But they're ultimately, if you build that relationship and it's non-transactional, it has business value. And so really success was about developing true, genuine relationships with other people that had influence for you and your business around you, right? And so at a young age, it was always about treating people that we knew as genuinely as possible and having as much fun and bringing as much value to their life, not necessarily as much value to their business, but then obviously offering them a value proposition for their business when it became appropriate, but really just about developing like a place where they could rely on. So not every friendship or acquaintance that you meet in this world is going to care and be willing to do something for you when they can, or make a connection for you when they could. Probably because they're busy, it's time consuming, they're not sure if there's a return for them.
Right.
My dad never cared about that.
And so, that brings me up to what we do in our firm and what you guys do in your law firm. It's about the people, it's about the relationship. So too many times in business, or just I see people don't, it's business, but they don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean,
where it's about the transaction, the next sale, and it's just, why can't you just build relationships with people and genuine relationships and help them? And then when it's not about the transaction, I think it actually leads to more transactions, right? Without that being the main goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Because not every relationship is important for that particular reason, right? Like even like your slogan, which I believe was when bad things happen to good people. And, I've always liked that because it was so concise. And really what you're kind of reiterating is that these are good people. And like a lot of people take the first concept of what you do in criminal law and take it a different direction. Right. I think that's kind of how you have to approach every opportunity to build a relationship, is like, how can I bring value to their life, right? And like, it's not necessarily about how can I bring value to their transaction, right? Sometimes they just need someone to listen to them. Sometimes they need to be referred somewhere else, right? Because I know that it's going to be better off that they spend their money doing this other thing. And at the end of the day, they're going to appreciate me more for that. And someone who will need my services, that the best value for them is talking to me, that person's sure to make sure that we connect. And that might be just for another conversation. And I'm willing to make those investments. And that's really led me to a lot of success. And I learned that at a super young age. It's not about going to work for a paycheck. Right. It's really about going to work to 100%. Take care of people.
100%. So let's talk a little bit. You get older, right? Where do you go to college?
I went to undergrad at Salve Regina University, which is in Newport, Rhode Island.
Okay, been to Newport. Went there once. Newport was beautiful. Oh, actually, I think I walked by that school. It's like an old school.
Yeah, it's an
right?
older.
It's an
older. Yeah, it's a Sisters of Mercy school, so it's a Catholic university.
Okay.
But they have a very open mentality toward the exploration of other religious groups, so it's not very strict in that manner. But it's inside of Gilded Age mansions.
That's what it is. So when I went to do all the mansion tours and stuff, we were like, wait, what's this school here? This is beautiful.
It was great. Okay. I used to play rugby out on the lawn of an old mansion. So like we would be there's a sheer rock cliff that drops down to the Atlantic Ocean, and you're on this sprawling lawn outside of a Gilded Age mansion. And it was like, that's where practice was.
So for everybody watching this, let's get out of South Florida. Let's go up to
Yeah, it's
Newport, at least for the
gorgeous.
summers, and we can,
I would love to have a vacation home there.
right. We can have the a nice fancy sweater tied around our neck. Play a little croquet and rugby, and live the good life, like we're in the Gilded Age.
I don't know if that's the environment, but sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's what I'm picturing here. So you went to school there. Now, let's talk us through kind of just your journey into when you decided you want to be a lawyer, because there's not a lot of lawyer entrepreneurs. Now, I know I'm one, you're one, right? But most people go to be a lawyer because they don't want to be an entrepreneur, and they just they love the law, or they have that kind of really good craftsmanship mentality where they don't want to take risk. They just want to show up, do good work, get a paycheck, maybe help some people. So kind of how did you go from young budding entrepreneur to going to law school?
So I was actually supposed to take over the family business. That was always the trajectory for me. So it wasn't so much that I needed to be a traditional entrepreneur as much as it was that I needed to learn business and management and understand how to improve an already existing business operation. And so I went to school, and I wasn't as concerned about my GPA as I was about learning the things that I felt like would value me for bringing the company, my family's business, up. And so I focused on that. But my father passed away from alcoholism when I was 2 weeks from graduating college, right? And so I went from having a job and a trajectory and a future to like kind of being uncertain of what my life would be like. And the correct direction at that point was, I always had this passion for law. I always found it to be fascinating. I always wanted to be a lawyer. I had my dad, a lot of friends who were lawyers. And so
the consigliere for the business.
Yeah, definitely needed the consigliere. And so the best thing for me at that point was to take up law school, and or at least it sounded like it would be. I definitely struggled with the loss of my father, and that really impacted me. And I obviously had grown up in an environment where alcohol was the solution to a lot of problems. And so kind of alcohol became a big solution for me while I was still in law school. And I lived in Rhode Island. I went to the Roger Williams University School of Law in Rhode Island at the time when I started. But what ultimately...
That was not in Gilded Ages.
No, it's not. It's very close, but it's also on the water. But it's it's a newer. The buildings are newer.
Okay.
It was a really, really awesome experience. It's a cool university. Their focus is on a lot of maritime law, but also a lot of diversity type law, and they focus on a decent amount of trial advocacy work and so forth. It's the only law school in Rhode Island, so it had some unique opportunities with it. But when I got there, I struggled. Like I said, I was coping still with alcohol, with my dad's loss, and I fell into some hard times. I ended up, like you said earlier, in the recovery community. Right. And so I've been in recovery since December of 2014.
Okay.
So almost 10 years now. And it's been an awesome experience. That relocated me to Florida, and it relocated me to Florida in the middle of law school. And I did not want to continue with the practice of law. I was a little bit disheartened by kind of what I felt like the career would be, as much as I loved the subject matter and I really loved what it stood for, and like how people in some of the like more unique moments of the law have these revelations or these opportunities, or the law changes, and like we do this great thing that changes how society operates for periods of time, and we make it a better place to live, right? Lawyers really can,
but we have the culture where people, it has one of the highest alcoholism rates, highest suicide rates, stress, anxiety.
Absolutely.
All those things.
And the business side of it is actually not that well functioning, right?
Right.
The
Yes.
business side of law is that people who don't want to be entrepreneurs go into law and then open a business and learn nothing about business, and then learn how to and start managing people, but learned nothing about managing
And they
people.
say, well, I'm a good lawyer, so I might as well just hang my own shingle and start my own firm or whatever it
Exactly,
may be.
right? And like there's a huge misconception as to how easy it is or the skills necessary to interoperate with, an appropriate balance of human involvement and to run a successful and profitable, right, enterprise, which you need to do to make it worthwhile so that your own family at home, right, can have the need of, you know, whether it be spousal or parental involvement in their
Of
life.
course.
And that's kind of something that's kind of put to the side in a lot of environments.
Right.
And so, yeah, and then it comes back to work and then back at home and then back
And
to work.
so, do you think that's something that the law schools promote, the state bars promote? Because we always hear that law is not, the practice of law. It's a profession, not a business. It's the doctrine of self-sacrifice. So at least when I was at law school, all those things were being propagated onto everybody. So where do you think that really comes from?
Really, I think it's environment. And like the thing is that if someone has chosen to pursue a particular path and they ended up experiencing a particular environment, and that environment has provided them with a degree of satisfaction, significance, success, or they're finding their comfort and love in what their own life is like as a result of that, they're bound as a natural bias to kind of justify it to the rest of the world in order to justify it to themselves. And
Okay.
so I do think that like there's no reason that it can't change, but really the people who are teaching it, the people who are leading the legal profession, the people that are engaged in the highest degrees of deciding what should be taught, administered, and mentored to new and young prospective attorneys are all people who are distorted with the concept of what their life was like,
Right.
and they're unable to see a different world because they've never lived a different world.
I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely spot on with that. Yeah.
But I run a successful law firm here in South Florida where our entire goal is to operate really in a manner that takes a different perspective, and we hold ourselves out first in a different way and then as lawyers secondly. And it's not so much we hold ourselves out, but like our focus is on how we're helping people in the area that our clients are concerned about, and then we just happen to provide a legal service.
Right. Absolutely. You're in the people business, the customer service business, and then secondarily, how you do that is through legal services.
Yes.
And that's why we're so aligned with that. We've been friends for 5-6 years, and I couldn't wait to have you on the show. So what I want to do now is we're going to take a little quick break to hear a word from our sponsor, and then when we come back, I want to dive deep into Robinson Casey, all the great stuff that you're doing, and really just how the whole firm got built and what the plans are for the future. So we'll be right back.
Awesome.
The Success in South Florida podcast is brought to you by the team at Rossen Law Firm. If you need DUI or criminal defense representation, call the Rossen Law Firm at 754-206-6200 or check the description of today's episode for more contact information. The Rossen Law Firm, helping good people when bad things happen so they can achieve their best futures.
All right, and we're back on the Success in South Florida podcast. So, Richard, we're talking all about you, how you grew up, Rhode Island, all the Gilded Age mansions and servants that you had.
I didn't have any servants.
I know. I'm teasing. But now you graduate law school, and what do you do, and how is Robinson Casey built?
Yeah, so really I graduated law school, and the decision that I made when I had gone back to law school was that I didn't want to work in a traditional firm environment and learn how to become a lawyer the way that we were just talking about. I decided that I wanted to find the client that I wanted to serve, and I wanted to go and work for that client directly and identify what their pain points were, what their needs were. Ultimately, what were the things that they were coming to a lawyer for? How could that person be better served? So I didn't go and work for a law firm. And so the area and the client that I wanted to serve were families with loved ones suffering from addiction and mental illness. And my dad had suffered that way, and I was that family member. right? But I was a younger man. I was in my early 20s, and my mom was suffering with figuring out what to do with her spouse. My sister was suffering about what to do with her father, right? My grandmother was suffering about what to do with her son. And we didn't have good solutions. So I went to go work for a treatment facility. Was a very large national non-for-profit facility that's been around for over 60 years at the time, almost 70 years now. And um, I worked doing their business operations, their licensure, their regulatory requirements.
So kind of like an in-house counsel.
Yes, type role,
Similar
exactly.
role.
And then I would be able to interface directly with the facility and how they serve the clients. And when clients came in the door, what were the things that they needed? And then basically I was able to back that out into starting my own practice. Now that I had identified the needs of my clients, I wasn't as focused on what legal services could I provide and how do I best provide legal services, or am I going to do a foreclosure, or am I going to do a bankruptcy proceeding, or am I going to write a contract? I was going to say, okay, my clients need this. How do I do and provide that service better than anybody else? And so I started.
Hold on for a second.
Go ahead.
So notice you're talking about how do I provide that service, as opposed to how do I win that case better? How do I, right? You're focusing more on the service of the person and the client and holistically, rather than just winning a technical piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the most accurate thing that a law school will teach you is that like you are not ultimately in control of what the results are, right? Like the most accurate thing that they can teach you is that like as a lawyer, you have to advise your client to get them as close as possible to the desired outcome, but you cannot guarantee it, right? Because ultimately there are too many variables in life to determine exactly how something will happen. So what you should be focused on is how do I deliver the best possible service to that client so that their experience throughout the entire period of time is supportive and appropriate and competitive, right, in such a way that they are as close to possible as their desired outcome, and they're actually feeling heard, appreciated, respected throughout the entire delivery of those services, right?
Right.
And one of the
Absolutely.
biggest things is communication.
Yep. Agreed. Communication is key for everything. And the more clients have the know, like, and trust, the more they have FaceTime. And FaceTime can be in person or just even on the phone or on Zoom.
Sure.
The more that they know you, they trust you, they really feel as though you're here to help them and their family and whatever their issues are. That's the key to everything.
And a lot of the times is that the client, no matter in what business you are, doesn't really understand what's behind the black box, right? When you provide a service, and it's not like a physical product, but even when you do buy a product, you don't exactly know how it's made, right? You don't know that like when you buy an iPhone, exactly what the chips are in it and all the stuff and how it works, right? You trust that it works though, because you've seen it and you have a functionality. But when they're hiring a legal service, they haven't quite seen it and they don't really know what's going on behind it.
Especially for people who are already scared, nervous, and stressed, and for people who maybe this is their first time ever hiring a lawyer.
And our businesses are very similar in that way, right? Families are coming with very similar situations, an absolute crisis, looking to save their loved one's life, right? Whether it be like long-term imprisonment, or it may be the fact that they could pass away from a substance use disorder, or they've had long-term suffering in the mental health dynamic, right? They're coming in a moment of need, in a moment of what is otherwise chaos and crisis, and they don't know what you do. So you have to be able to explain to them what it is you're going to do, and in a way that they can appreciate. So it's not about always getting on the phone or always giving them FaceTime, because some of them would take up all of your time and you couldn't serve them. But it's about delivering that information in a way that they can, right, appreciate what actually is happening and what work you're doing. So it's overly important to communicate in writing and on phone calls, right, at the beginning of the relationship and throughout, all the stuff that you're going to have to do and all the stuff that you do to make sure they get the result they need.
I believe that we explain what we're going to do, we explain how we're going to do it, and we explain why. Because we have intelligent clients. And for us, we're very strategic, and we want to be able to peel back the layers and say, well, these are our options. This is why this is a good one. This is why this might be a bad one. This is why we want to do this. Instead of well, I'm the lawyer, you're the client. All right, so Richard, so we've talked about, your belief in service, in helping others, but guiding and holding people's hand through the process, building trust. What was it like to take the leap from leaving that, facility, working there for a few years, to hang your own shingle? Was it scary? What was it? What was it like?
It was scary. In fact, that's one of the first times that we really dove into our relationship. I had reached out to people that I knew ran businesses that provided a legal service. And so you were one of the first people that I was able to talk to about that. But the pandemic actually happened shortly after I did it.
I remember we went to lunch a few weeks before the world shut down.
Yeah, exactly. And it really actually offered me a great opportunity. I thought it was fantastic opportunity for like me to focus on building the business. And I always thought every day when I woke up, am I working in the business or am I working on the business? Right? And I separated those two activities very specifically in my mind as I shifted back and forth. And I obviously had to work in the business as its only employee to deliver legal services to my clients when I had that opportunity. And I needed to
be the legal assistant, and be the intake coordinator,
and be and do the consultations, and be my own executive assistant, and be the paralegal, and call the court, right? And the marketer, and everything. And it was really valuable, but I was always identifying in my mind, am I working in the business or am I working on the business? And working on the business was the thing that I was always trying to get to. And I was always focused on working on the business because I understand that when you're building a house, it's wonderful if you can hang paintings, but at the end of the day, you have to build a strong foundation.
Absolutely.
And so you can't start with all of the beautiful decor. You have to start with setting yourself with a footing. The ground has to be cleared, right? And it's not glamorous. And so, I went and I really focused on finding the right platforms to develop my business upon, finding the right tools to be able to set myself up so that I would be efficient, so that when my clients did hire me, that I could ultimately provide them a more consistent service, right? Something that allowed me to spend more time communicating with them instead of fiddling, right, with figuring out how to get to the end result through that service delivery process. And so I spent time building that foundation so that as I continued to establish more and more relationships, and I had a broader delivery of services. I offered more services at first to figure out which one of the services, right, ultimately was a greater demand.
So what are some examples of things that you did at first?
Well, obviously I was focused on serving people that were had family members in the recovery community. And so I wanted to offer services that included probate if individuals had passed away, but also provide it in a comprehensive and understanding manner. I would do estate planning in advance of that, right? Okay. But ultimately we also provide involuntary treatment services for loved ones who are still suffering, and there's hope for them to get recovered, but they don't have the desire to admit to treatment. And that's a unique Florida law called the Marchman Act. And so we kind of really focused on that. I took the opportunity to really kind of spend the most time developing the systems associated with the Marchman Act and understand the needs of the families who had this loved one who was still suffering and still had hope, but was unwilling to admit to treatment. And we were able to, really focus on kind of building relationships with interventionists and case management firms and treatment facilities that are working with these families. And they want so badly for their loved one to come to treatment, and they're willing to take the necessary steps to make that happen, but the loved one who needs treatment won't go.
And so this is such a niche area of law. I mean, we're talking about a Florida law called the Marchman Act that I don't know if other states have an equivalent or not, but we live in a big state. It's not like there's hundreds of thousands of people who are seeking these services every year. Like there are people who get arrested, or millions of people who have family issues and getting divorced, or immigration, or personal injury, car crash and slip and falls. So how did you decide, the process from the business standpoint of, well, let me niche down to this thing that, I don't know what the numbers are, but maybe a few thousand people a year actually know about and actually go through, right? Because I didn't even know about this area of the law until maybe 7-8 years ago. Only a few years before I met you.
Sure.
And I'd been a lawyer for a good 5-10 years at that point.
Sure. And a lot of people still don't know and still don't understand it. The interesting thing is that the law applies to anyone located in Florida. So it doesn't just apply to Florida residents. And so anyone who comes here, whether it be on vacation, whether it be for treatment, whether it have been for treatment 5 years ago and they're relapsed and they're still here in the area, it really applies. And so some families will make arrangements for their loved one to come to Florida just so that they can access this life-saving law. So we chose to niche down because there isn't a comparable option in a lot of other states, and people are wishing for something like this, and it's not perfect, but it's really good, right? And so there's families out there with loved ones suffering and potentially, running the risk of passing away from their addiction, and it's incredibly sad. They feel as though they don't have any hope, they don't have any solution, that there's no one out there for them. And so we niche down because this is the thing that these people are wishing for, and they are more than happy to go through this difficult legal process with their loved one, because it means that at the end, right, their loved one can be in treatment and get the life-saving care that they need. The unique thing about the Florida law of the Marchman Act too, as it compares to others, is that, like, as applied, families can access the same private treatment facilities that anyone would be able to access voluntarily. It's not like the facility doors lock all of a sudden, and it's not like you can only go to the psych ward, and it's not like you can only go to the locked hospital that's just for these involuntary people. They're not shunned away. They're incorporated into the same environment as everyone else that's there and wants to be there. And they actually have a better chance of being successful when surrounded by people who are desiring recovery, influencing their behavior, than they would if you took all the people who don't want any help and put them all in the same locked room.
Right.
So other states think that that's a better solution. We're only going to lock up some people who really need it, but the only way to do it is actually lock them up. The Marchman Act brings them into an environment of people that want to be there voluntarily, requires that they stay via court order, mandates it, and puts a consequence for their decision to change their behavior and leave, right? And ultimately, they are choosing each day to not suffer the consequence of being held in contempt of court, and instead choosing to accept the requirement of treatment and moving towards recovery with more positive influences around them. It's a really wonderful opportunity for these families to get their loved one a kickstart in the right direction.
So, I mean, that seems like it's fantastic, and it's powerful, where the law has some teeth to really, like you said, get that kickstart, that jump start for somebody who is in denial, right? As we know that there's so many people that just, either they're in denial or they know it, they just don't want to take those next steps and need a little bit of a kick in the butt.
Absolutely. And realistically, there's not as many people to do criminal law. There's not as many attorneys to do Marchman Act, right? And so there may be 10,000 or more Marchman Acts filed each year in the state of Florida, right? And so there are certainly families desiring to have this, and they're trying to do it on their own, and sometimes they're failing to be able to navigate the legal system. It's not as easy as it looks, right?
So when we're talking from a marketing piece, because marketing is one of the major parts of running a successful firm, are you guys marketing only in Florida? Are you marketing nationwide? How is that?
Yeah, our marketing is kind of what we started to talk about at the beginning, right? With the foundation of how I learned to develop relationships with my father and going to different meetings that were business meetings. And my marketing is relationships. My marketing is developing and earning trust. And I earn trust from interventionists that work nationally. I earn trust from treatment centers that work internationally. I earn trust from case managers and other lawyers and therapists, and I speak to them in their language. Earlier on, I alluded to this. We actually see ourselves as a business, right, that is a member of the behavioral health team. Our focus is on being a member of this behavioral health team. There's treatment centers that do residential, there's partial hospitalization, or, right, semi-outpatient, semi-inpatient,
right,
if you want to think of it, right? PHP. There's outpatient services, there's recovery residences, there's case managers, interventionists, there's lawyers, right? We don't necessarily see ourselves as just regular lawyers. We see ourselves as a member of this behavioral health team, and the service that we provide is a legal service. It just so happens to be that service that we provide. but our focus is on developing a team, right, inside of our business that is dedicated to delivering, right, a behavioral health, right, experience.
Right. And that's such an important distinction, because when you're part of a very tight-knit, close behavioral health community, sometimes you think that these lawyers can come in and be interlopers, kind of, or they don't understand us, they don't get us, or they're just here to do one thing and leave, right? And so when you position yourself, because it's true, and that's what you guys are, as no, we're part of this comprehensive, plan, this comprehensive community. This is us, right? We chose this field of law because we're members of this community.
Personally,
Right.
as in my own recovery, and as with my family, I am my client. I am the worst client that I get all of the time. Maybe not like the client, but I'm the client's loved one.
Right.
Like, and I am the client too, right? When I get
It's like the old hair club for men commercials, right? You're not only the president, you're also a client. Like, you know what it's like to be on those ends, both ends.
absolutely.
Right? And that to me makes, I'm sure your clients are eternally grateful for that, because so much of your job is being the counselor at law, not necessarily the attorney at law, the friend, the confidant, sometimes the shoulder just to cry on, right? Sometimes to have a mom, bitch to you, not at you about the situation, and just to be able to let them know that you feel her, right? Or
Absolutely. And we
pain.
don't lead with our experience of being in recovery or having family members that have gone through it. That's not what's going to make someone comfortable. Talking about me and my experience, it's the nuance that in their crying and in the pain in their voice, in the anxiety that they're expressing, that I can say, I know all too well just how anxious you are. And I'm trying my best to make sure that I can provide you something that ultimately meets your goals. The thing is, before they even tell me what their goals are, I know what their goals are, right? I want them to tell me because I want to be confirmed, and I'm not going to tell them what they are. But at the end of the day, my heart already knows what they're looking for.
All right, Richard. So, we're going to wrap this up a little bit. Tell us, where's the business now? What are your big plans for the future? I know your partner, Craig's, doing really well too. We're going to probably have him on a later episode. I wanted you first because you gave him the first name in the firm. So I figured we'd have you first.
Yeah. So I actually started my business as a solo practice, and Craig and I merged. And it was that we had been working together in this space for a little while, kind of as two separate entities, and we had merged, and it was just Craig and I then running this business for a good year and a half, almost 2 years, and before we had one employee. So it was just Craig and I helping families day to day for almost 2 years. And really, we've taken the steps to develop, like I said, working on the business, to work on systems and improvements and policies and templates, and getting things into a place where we could scale up. And so now, over the last year, we've hired 3 legal assistants. We have 2 associate attorneys. We have a case specialist who works with families directly on the front end, so when they can speak to them more immediately. And we have an operations director.
That's impressive.
Yeah, so that's all been happening this year. And
We have a big new space.
we have
I know.
new office space we're expanding to, and really we feel as though we can also offer guardianship services on a more comprehensive basis. We focus in on those 2 main things. Craig still does do some personal injury work, so that's still a component of our firm. And again, we try to bring that same customer experience to the delivery of all of our services. But our real kind of goal is to provide services further around the state of Florida, and to develop, other like-minded lawyers who have a positive work environment, that have a good experience, and they feel supported and have the ability to grow internally, so that our clients continue to receive a comprehensive delivery of expert services in a crisis situation. So who knows, hopefully in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll be talking about our 5 associates and our 15-person staff.
Well, we can have you on in a few years to talk about how that growth's doing, how, the ups and the downs, and
Sure.
all right, how just the whole process, because obviously I can A lot of people know my story when I'm guests on podcasts about how the firm's been, the great ups, but also the struggles of building and scaling and maintaining quality, internally and externally. and everything.
Absolutely. It's not without its road bumps. It's not without its challenges. That's for
But
sure.
I wouldn't have it any other way. So, Richard, how can people listening to this find you? And what would you say to maybe anybody, right? A young entrepreneur, a young lawyer, it doesn't have to be young, anybody listening to this saying, wow, I want to talk to him. I want to reach out. I want to learn more about him.
So my email address is richard@robinsoncasey.com. Our website is www.robinsoncasey.com. Casey is spelled Casey. That's our firm name. We're also on Instagram and Facebook. But please reach out, send me an email. Our firm phone number, if you need something more immediately, is 561-203-0085. And you can just contact us if there's someone who's a young entrepreneur that wants to learn more. I'd be happy to take them to lunch and explain to them some of the different things that I did to really get going. But if you want to learn more about our firm or our services, or just inquire for whether or not this makes sense, as it finds to finding the right client and then building a business around what they do. Yeah, I'd love to talk more to anybody who's interested.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Well, thanks so much for being on our show, and definitely want to have you back in a few years to keep up and see how the journey's going. So thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate being here.